My name is Richard, and I'm an alcoholic. And it is an honor and a privilege to do anything for Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay. So the house cleaning is, I've got a sponsor, and he's got a sponsor, and I have the opportunity and just the opportunity and the gift, the willingness to be a sponsor. It's a blessing. Keeps me sober. My sobriety date is June 16th of 2003. And I prayed before I left the house, so I'm waiting for God to kick in. And, this room filled up quick. But that's all right. Just a drunk telling this story. The reality of it is I was born and raised here in this area. I was born over in Pinehurst. I was born breech, so I came out showing my butt. And I continued that for years until I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Growing up, I grew up in an alcoholic house. My first introduction to AA was men coming over to the house and 12th stepping my dad. He was an alcoholic. And I was wondering why these strange guys were coming in and sitting down and talking. And my earliest memories, I remember my dad walking around with a saucer and a cup and it just shaking like crazy. And he coming out of the bedroom and going, "Do not go in there. There are spiders everywhere." And as a little kid, I'm going, "What in the world? Spiders? I'm not going in there." I believe that I was born with this disease, and I'm grateful that I found the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I truly believe that alcohol kept me alive and kept me from blowing my brains out. I just didn't know how to function in society. One of my first memories is in kindergarten, and I don't know why, but the teacher asked me to go across the hall and tell the teacher across the hall something. And I got across the hall and I couldn't remember what she told me to tell her. So that teacher told me to go back. And I went back and told her I couldn't remember what she told me. And she told me again, sent me back over there. And this happened like 3 or 4 times in a row. So something was off with me from the get-go. ADHD or whatever you want to call it. Fast forward, I didn't get to play much in school because I never did my homework. So I was always in when all the other kids were out playing. Get to middle school, I was a class clown. And then I was always my dad's bartender. Growing up as a little itty bitty kid, my memories are going to get the refrigerator and getting a beer and taking it to him while he's watching the game. And my reward for that would always be the first sip. And I remember drinking it and going, I just like the taste of it. I loved alcohol from the get-go. We're in the meeting last night. I think I drank alcoholically from the moment I put alcohol into my body. It was just something that allowed me to come out and play. Took the edge off, allowed me to talk, allowed me to just be around people. Because I was just so afraid of everything. Prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd have told you I wasn't afraid of nothing. Because I was always masking it with something. And today, I get to live free. I get to face those fears and walk through those fears thanks to this program, these steps, sponsorship, this fellowship, the whole deal. But it was either in 7th or 8th grade, I got suspended for the first time for being drunk at school. And I remember there was this girl that liked me. And there was a guy that wanted to go out with her. And he said, "Man, I'll give you 2/5 of liquor if you give me a chance to go out with this girl." I said, "Sure." I was used to already stealing alcohol from my dad, and and all that stuff. So yeah, he paid up, and I was falling down, head butting chalkboards, slinging books, cussing teachers by lunchtime. I didn't make it to lunch. And they had to come get me. And when, growing up, I can remember going and getting a welfare cheese, and we only had one car, so they had to call my dad, and my dad he owned his own business. We only had one car, so what happened was he had to quit and come to school and pick me up. And I remember that was the first time I swore I'd never do it again. I'm laying on the couch crying. I'm so sorry, I'll never do this again. And that time passed, and I couldn't wait to do it again. We had this store in town that allowed us to, she would pay us, the lady that owned the store, she would pay us in candy bars and soft drinks if we would take out the trash. And the whole time, we're still in cartons of cigarettes and cases of beer. And we actually put that store out of business. And I had to go back and make amends to that woman after I'd gotten sober and taken these steps. But, so fast forward, I get into high school, and I get this girlfriend that's older than me. She's got a car. She works 2 jobs. And she's my chauffeur. And I can say that I didn't get any DWIs before coming into Alcoholics Anonymous. Not that I didn't deserve them. I just didn't get them. But I ended up marrying her. That was my high school sweetheart. That was marriage number 1. And I never will forget, I actually used to live 3 blocks up the road. And my dad actually brought me to my first AA meeting in this very building after I'd gotten suspended for being drunk at school. So I knew this was an AA building. And I would ride by and give a beer can salute. And I'd see everybody standing outside with their white styrofoam cups. And I would drive on by. And I never will forget, and my house was a drunk house. It was the one that had the lawnmower in the front yard with all the grass growing up around it. Yeah, that was me. Paint peeling. But I never will forget, I was sitting on the couch one day, and the wife came in, and she looked at me, and I could just tell. And I asked her, I said, and she still was working 3 jobs, and I asked her, I said, so why are you working so much? She said, to stay away from you. I had a lot of fun drinking. I mean, it was a part of my everyday life. It was something that I did when I woke up. I had a friend of mine ask me one time, said, how can you drink at 7 o'clock in the morning? And I said, why not drink at 7 o'clock in the morning? I remember the nights when I would roll over and grab that beer can off the dresser, turn it up in the middle of the night, and spit the cigarette butt back in it. Yeah. Flat beer. It didn't matter. But I always worked. And I could always justify my drinking because if I worked hard, then I could play hard. And, eventually it all started catching up with me. I got these things I call my series of unfortunate events. And in hindsight, I can see where this is my God, my higher power, pointing me in the direction going, okay, kid, here's a little thump. Here's a little harder thump. And smack, smack. Because you're just a little slow, And, and I qualify for about any 12-step program you got. If it changes me, then I'm all for it. So, I'm grateful that I've found a solution in these rooms. So what happened was, the first little inkling was, I'd gotten suspended in the 7th and 8th grade. I don't know which one it was. Fast forward, I'm at my job. I'm the first one there, and I'm the last one to leave. So I unlock the gate. I'm driving a company truck. I'm driving around. I'm pulling behind convenience stores, and I'm buying wine because I think it smells like Kool-Aid. And the boss man pulls me in and says, one of the contractors said that they smelled alcohol on you. And I used to always tell myself that I wasn't going to drink on the job. Honest day's work for honest day's pay. And eventually I started breaking all my own rules. And I started doing all the things that I said I'd never do. And I'm driving around in a company truck, drinking wine, and not worrying about getting pulled over. But he pulls me in there and he says, one of the contractors says that you smell like alcohol. And I said, okay. He said, now, if we even suspect you drinking on the job, then you're going to get a blood test. And if there's any alcohol in your body whatsoever, you're fired. I said, okay. Well, a couple weeks pass. That's another one of God saying, okay, wake up, wake up. A little bit of time passes, and I go up to Ashburn to see a friend of mine. And while we're up there, and by this time, all I'm drinking is wild turkey, white liquor, or tequila. And then vodka just to hold me through. I was one of those that kept a fifth of vodka under the seat and would drink beer sociably. And I'd always drink by the case, and I'd keep it room temperature. That way, if anybody wanted one, they would have to put it in the freezer and let it get cold. So it just slowed down. It just meant I could drink more. And I like the taste of warm beer. There's a joke that goes with that, but I'm not going to say that. Yeah. So I go to visit my buddy up in Ashburn, and I knew this guy my whole life, grew up with him. And we were drinking, and I said something about his mom, and he was a little sensitive about that. But I knew his mom. He should have known I was picking. He took it pretty serious, and next thing you know, I'm stopping my truck in the middle at 220 up in Ashboro, and we're fixing to get out and start fighting. Well, we decide we ain't going to get out in the middle of 220, so we go back to his house. I'd been up for a day or so, and drinking and stuff, and I could tell it was going to get bad again. So I figured I better exit stage left. So next thing you know, I'm coming down 220, coming in and out of a blackout. I remember my truck, and it's the same truck my brother Ryan drives. And that truck's got a governor on it at 95, and it would just cut off. I don't remember taking the ramps. I don't remember anything. 7 Lakes, nothing. I remember pulling up in the driveway, and I was living in Pine Bluff. And I went by a buddy's house. They were going to go riding out in the woods. Okay. And I always liked driving on dirt roads. I would take it, and I'd get drunk, and eventually nobody wanted to ride with me, because my theory was, if I'm driving on a dirt road and I wreck, I'm not going to get that hurt because I can't go that fast. It's the way I rationalize things. And so I figure they say they're going to go ride four-wheelers, and we're going to keep partying. So I take my truck out on some game lands. And I learned how to drive out there. So I knew all the roads. I knew all the shortcuts. And so I'm taking that truck, and I'm doing laps around this field in the middle of the night. And next thing you know, there's blue lights in the middle of the woods. And all I can think of is, do I stop or do I go? And I go. And I remember using all the little tricks, and using the emergency brake and cutting off the headlights. And I turned around, and I'd lost him. I'd gotten way out in front of him. But I had this thought that said, Richard, if you get on the paved road, it's a whole different game. So I turned it around, used the old emergency brake and headlight trick, and waited for him to go by me. And sure enough, he come by, blue lights. Poof, went airborne out into this field. So I said, here's my chance. So I take off with my headlights off. And this little voice inside my head says, Richard, if you keep going, I can't help you. So I stop, put the truck in park, open the door, and get out. And at this time, I ain't got no shirt on. All I got is blue jeans. I don't even know if I was wearing shoes. I was drunk. And this cop comes sliding up sideways, and I'd never had a gun pulled on me before, and points a gun at me. My hands go up in the air, and the first words out of my mouth were, "I'm just a good old boy. I don't mean no harm." The Dukes of Hazzard growing up was one of my favorite TV shows. And the next thing you know, he's handcuffing me, putting me in the front seat of this police car, and he's searching my truck. And he's looking for guns and animals. And I've got I've got felonies in the ashtray. I've got stuff in the ashtray, in the floorboard, empties. And he's just looking for guns and animals. Yeah. Well, I'm sitting there, and I remember just sweating profusely. I said, "Man, can you please wipe the sweat from my eyes?" And he actually wiped the sweat from my eyes. Then sat down and said, "I want you to blow in this." And this is when game wardens, come to find out it was a game warden. He said, "I want you to blow in this." And I remember blowing out the side of my mouth, blowing through my nose. He said, "Come on." He said, "I tell you what, I'm not even going to write it down. I just want to know what you would blow because, my God, son, you stink." I never realized when I was drinking how much alcohol stinks when it comes out your pores. I can smell it from a mile away now. It's like, okay. I know it. But so I said, "Fine." And I just gave a little puff. And it was like a .22. And I didn't even think I was that drunk. He said, "Okay." He said, "If you can get somebody to come get you, then I'm not going to take you to jail. But if that truck's gone in the morning, then all bets are off." So I called my ex-sister-in-law up and said, "Hey, can you come get me? I'm out here at the pit, sand pit." And she said, "Yeah." Well, she gets out there and she said, "Take him to jail. Take him to jail." I said, "What?" She said, "There could be kids out here playing." I said, "It's 11 o'clock at night. If the kids are out here, the parents need to go to jail." But anyway, she reluctantly took me back to the house, which was, right through the woods there. So that was my next little thump of, okay, here we go. Well, in the meantime, I've got that going on. I get there's a state game playing, and I ain't got cable, so I'm gonna go to the bar and watch it. And I was one of those that never. I didn't go out to bars. I drank around fires out in the middle of the woods, or I stayed at my house, usually by myself, because there weren't too many people that liked to drink like I drank. What happened was I went to this bar, and I was always the guy, if I did go to a bar, that usually didn't get in because he was too drunk to even walk in the door. They'd say, "Nah, we're not going to let you in." I've been kicked off of about 3 fishing piers. And you know how hard it is to get kicked off a fishing pier? Yeah. No, we're not letting you even walk on this pier. That kind of drunk. But that night, I remember, and that was the first night I learned that you couldn't lay your head down on a bar. I just remember if I did go out, it'd always be a double of wild turkey, no chaser. So I couldn't lay my head on the bar, so I remember I kept trying to lean up against the wall. I figured I could stand up. But every time I tried to lean up against the wall, I'd fall. And so what happened was, come to find out, I was leaning up against the door to the kitchen. So I did like this 2 or 3 times. So then I got a taxi, and I'm going to go over to a buddy of mine's house and get something to keep me partying. I get over there, I fall over in his bathroom. I got this thing about falling over, but I keep going. I break his girlfriend's glasses. Next thing you know, we're out in his front yard fighting. And it is a childhood friend. And the next thing you know, the cops are coming up. The cops pull up. And come to find out, the taxi driver had called him because I didn't pay him for the taxi. I'd lost my wallet. Come to find out, it was still in the taxi after I got out of jail. But backing up, the cops pull up, and I went to school with them. I was born and raised here. Went to school with them. They said, Richard, just calm down. Calm down. They handcuffed me, put me in the front seat of this police car, and they're just asking me what's going on. And I've always had this thing about headbutting. I mean, as a little kid, that was my defense against older kids. If you grabbed me, I was going to headbutt you. And it was effective. But I would headbutt anything. And so I'm headbutting this window of this patrol car. And the cop opens it up and says, look, if you don't stop, we're going to hog tie you. And I didn't think they were serious. So I headbutted a couple more times, and next thing you know, onto the ground, pepper sprayed, about 3 cops, into the back seat this time. And I don't remember, I went into a blackout after that. Next thing you know, I come to, and I'm sitting in front of this police car. And I look over, and I said, where are we going? He said, we're going to Moore County. I said, oh, no, I ain't never been in jail before. I said, I don't want to go to jail. I said, okay. So I'm in and out of a blackout. I don't remember much. Next thing you know, I remember standing in front of the magistrate's office. This was on a Saturday night, and I remember thinking there was this urban legend about if you own property in the county in which you are arrested, you could sign your own bail. And I tried to bring this up to the magistrate's attention. And they said, no, we heard about you. I think we're going to keep you for a while. And I remember seeing a little sticker down at the bottom that said bulletproof or something. And I thought I'd just be real smart. So I took my handcuffs and I hit the glass in front of this magistrate and cracked it. That's an expensive piece of glass because I had to replace it. But the magistrate just jumped back like this and sort of smiled. And then I happened to turn around, and they were like, all I saw was chest. These dudes were like this tall. And I said, whoa, scared the bejesus out of me. But that was the way I was, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'd be laughing one minute, and the next minute I'm threatening to fold you in half. It's crazy. I never knew who was going to show up, the funny Richard or the angry Richard. But next thing you know, they put me in this holding cell. And all I can remember is there was a stainless steel sink thing over here, or maybe a toilet, a stainless steel bed. And I remember laying on there, and for some reason I started chanting like an Indian. Hey, 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 hey. I remember the acoustics in that thing was awesome. I mean, I could feel it vibrating my innards. And I just went into chanting. Hey, hey, hey. And I know if this bailiff came up, she said, it was this black lady. She said, honey, are you okay? I said, yes. She said, what are you doing? I said, I'm talking to my ancestral brothers. I don't know where that comes from. So I go right back into chanting. Hey, hey, hey. And the whole time, I remember staring at this fluorescent light that was on the ceiling. And I'd accepted my alcoholic fate. That was my surrender. I'd accepted the fact that I was going to die an alcoholic. And that this was the first of many trips to this place. By this time, I drank away all of my friends. I drank away my family. I was alone. And I remember praying to God, God, just take the air from my lungs, because I don't want to live like this anymore. If this is the way life's going to be, I don't want to be here. I mean, I didn't have enough. I couldn't pull a trigger because I'm so selfish. But I tried anything and everything. And I just remember, God, please take the air from my lungs. And I had an experience. I had a spiritual experience. You know, that's the last thing I remember. And then the next thing I remember is I remember looking at my hands going, wow, this is pretty cool. It was like staring out into the sky tonight and it being crystal clear and being able to see stars and seeing into infinity. And growing up, staring into at my safe place where I would always go, and I was always an emotional kid, but I had this place on my roof growing up that I would climb up, and I would just lay on my back and stare at the stars. But while I'm having this experience, I remember looking around, and there was nothing but stars and infinity all around me. And I remember wiggling my toes going, this is pretty cool. You know, I'd tried a lot of drugs to experience that, and it didn't work. And then I got this feeling. You ever get that feeling somebody's watching you? And I got this feeling something was watching me. And I remember looking over my shoulder to see what it was, and there was nothing there. And I remember turning back around, and when I turned back around, I had this feeling come over me from head all the way down to my fingertips, down to my toes, this warm feeling. And this still little voice said, everything's going to be okay. And for the first time in 27 years, I could breathe. And for some reason, I knew that everything was going to be okay. I believed it. I was riddled with fear of everything up to that point. That's why I drank. Well, next thing you know, I come to, and I'm in this. They're taking me down to general population. And they put me in there, and I recognized somebody I went to high school with. And I said, I walk up to him, he says, oh, you're the one that they were talking about last night. I said, yeah, I guess. But the first words out of my mouth were, I don't know what happened to me last night, man, but my life's going to be different. Something happened that night. Actually, I believe I felt the presence of God. This is my spiritual experience. What happened was, come to find out, the secretary's son was in jail with me. And I had him call his mom, which was the secretary of the place that I worked, and told her that I wasn't going to be coming in to work. So what happened was, fast forward, I get out of there and I want to keep my job. So I'm going to go to treatment because it's going to look good in court. I go to this treatment center and, first I have to go back to that employer that had already given me that written warning and said, I think I've got a problem with alcohol. And I wanted to get ahead of the newspaper and all the other stuff. He said, okay. So what happened was he got me in touch with the Employees Assistance Program. They set me up with a treatment center. And I was hoping it would be one of those pinky out kind of, yoga and golf. And no, this is, I think it's Davis. At the time, it was called Davison Alcoholic Care up near Lexington. Now I think it's Path of Hope, maybe. I'm not sure. But when I went there, it was an old farmhouse. And it had like 13 beds, nothing but dudes. And I remember writing in my journal, this is one step above jail. At least here I got to bring my pillow. Or some, I'm grateful as the dickens. But I'm grateful for that place because it got me out of that routine that I'd lived in for so many years. It's the first time I'd been sober. I'd tried to quit drinking one time before when I was married to that first wife for a week. And after that week, I remember going, see, I'm not an alcoholic. And then I remember drinking more and consciously going, wow, dude, that's just a week and you are slamming these things. So I'm up here at this treatment center, and you got to work the first 5 steps to get out. And I figured, what the heck? I'd had this spiritual experience. We were doing these classes all day and doing chores, and you couldn't sleep, and you had to, do this, that, and other thing. And I know they thought I was crazy because I'd pick up rocks and walk around this place, just slinging them, because I had to do something to stay active. But you had to do the fifth step before you left. And I'd wrote down, I figured I'm out of town, nobody knew me. I'm just going to write all this stuff down. So I just wrote everything down, from kicking the dog, stealing my dad's change, just everything. Things that happened to me as a child, things I'd never told anybody about in my entire life. I'd gotten as honest as I could possibly be. And then they said, well, you need to tell somebody. And they stood these 5 guys up, and I picked the oldest one, hoping he would die shortly after I told him these things. And I don't know what happened to him, but it was interesting because I start telling him these things, and he starts telling me these things. And we start sharing back and forth, and I can feel myself getting lighter and lighter and lighter. Because I'm getting rid of all that baggage I'd carried around for 27 years of my life that I'd never told a soul about. And somebody is finally hearing the things that are coming out of my mouth. And he's sharing with me his experience. You couldn't have beat the smile off my face after I'd finished telling him all this stuff. I mean, I almost felt like I floated back to my room. But then I had to leave the next day, and I didn't want to leave. All this was new to me. So I get out of there, and they say, burn your 4th step. And I burned it. Then I came in here, and I get out of there, and they tell me my ex-wife's grandmother was Black Belt Al-Anon. I should have known something. Yeah, I should have known something when we bought this house up the street. There were 2 sheds, his and her shed. My shed had an AA book in it. I guarantee she put it in there. But I called down here to see where meetings were. And she said there's one down there on Thursday night at the Wilder building. I said, okay. It's 8 o'clock. I said, I just got out of treatment. I probably ain't going to go tonight. She said, you need to go to a meeting tonight. And I don't know what the stats are on if you go to a meeting the day after you get out, but it's greatly improved. So I come down here, and at the time it was a Thursday night. The name of the meeting was the Individually Twisted Group. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was a gay and lesbian group. And I come strolling on up in here, and they welcome me in. My first meeting out of a treatment center, and I was sitting. They used to have these big wooden tables, and I was sitting about where Blake's at. And I remember having a panic attack. I mean, just sweating profusely, couldn't hardly breathe, about to fall out. And this lady put her hand on my shoulder and said, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Just breathe." And, from then on, I came to meetings. And I came here and I drank coffee, smoked cigarettes, and eyeballed women. I'd worked the first 5 steps in treatment, and I stopped. Next thing you know, I get in a relationship. Then I quit that job I went to treatment to keep. And I move. I do everything they tell you not to do in early recovery. So, I moved down to Wilmington. And I'm still reading a little bit. I'm still praying. But I move, and everything starts to slowly stop. Then that relationship takes a twist. Okay. She doesn't like me when I'm sober. Let's see how she likes me when I'm drunk. I know today that the drink happens way before I take a drink. The drink is the last thing that happens. It's my thinking and all the crazy stuff that goes on in my head prior to me putting anything into my body. So I get here, And what happened was I was down in Wilmington, and I hadn't drank in about 16 months. And I never drank. I always drank alcoholically. So I'm going to buy this 12-pack of Bud Light. Bud Light. I never drank Bud Light, but I wanted to watch my figure. And this whole process of me buying this 12-pack of Bud Light felt like an eternity, about 10 minutes. First, she wouldn't take my ID. I had a motorcycle license and a regular license. But they were so smudged up from busting stuff up, you couldn't read them. So she didn't want to take them. Then she actually takes them. Then she overcharges me. So I need some money back. But she can't just give me the money back. She got to go get the manager out of the back. The whole time I hadn't drank in 16 months. I'm going to meetings. And not once did the thought of praying about, God, please take this thought of insanity away. Not once did the thought of calling a sponsor come to mind. I'd already made up my mind I was going to get drunk. So I get back to the place, and my little brother's there, and that was my ride or die. He was driving me around, probably 13 or 14 years old, because I was too drunk to drive, and I thought it would just be safer if he drove. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But he looks at me, and I got this Bud Light, and I'm fixing to take a drink, and he goes, Richard, don't do it. Don't do it. I said, I popped the top on it. He said, I'm going to call your sponsor. I said, I don't care. Call him. Call him. He said, I'm going to call Grandpa. I said, boy, you call Grandpa, and I will stomp you. Because my grandpa's the one that took me to treatment to begin with. So, but I remember taking that drink, and my God, the warm fuzzies, the needles, the pricklies just whoosh washed over me. And I don't remember drinking 3 beers before I went into a blackout. And I stayed there for days. And prior to that, I would probably drink a fifth and a couple beers a day. And I black out after 3 beers, and I stay there. And then I remember bits and pieces for days. And then I come to one morning with a Budweiser in one hand and a coffee in the other. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning. And I remember thinking to myself, oh God, not again. Please help me. And I was broke, staying at my aunt's house. I'm going to go pawn this PlayStation I got so I can get some beer money and some gas money because I got to get home. I go to the mall, and I guess they got to process it or something. I take it in there, and I'm trying to sell this thing. And I take it in there, and then I go back out to the truck because I got a case of beer out there that I've got to slam. And I'm not getting that ease and comfort that I used to get. I remember walking up to the door of the mall after slamming 1 or 2 and going, nope, not yet, and going back, slamming hot Budweiser. Try and get right to, no, not yet. And I did that like 3, 4, 5 times. So eventually I just sat in the truck and slammed about 6, 7, 8 beers. And then I could walk in there, and then I don't remember much. But I remember I had to get back to Aberdeen. I remember my first day back, I sat in the very back there. My sponsor at the time used to sit right here and smoke cigars. He used to get smoke in here. Smoke would be about down to here. It's good times, good times. And but I remember walking and being so freaking scared to pick up another white chip. And I picked up that white chip, and I went up to him after the meeting. I said, look, man, I don't know what I had before, but it didn't work. I've got to do something different. He said, okay. So what happened was, he got me in touch with a man that had working knowledge of that big book. My sponsor, myself, and about 5 other people sat back there in that kitchen, and we went through the big book. And we just sat down and opened it up and started reading it. When it asked us to do something, we did it. I didn't have a problem with the second step because I'd had that spiritual experience. Now, I was raised up in the church. I had a spiritual experience chanting like an Indian. I came in here real confused. And, I heard y'all sharing about your creator. Your higher power. And you didn't force anything on me. So we're sitting back here and we're going through this big book. And I remember I'm this real intellectual guy, so I've got to figure stuff out before I'm willing to see what the payout is. And I remember talking to my sponsor about, well, what came first, AA or God, or vice versa. And he said, it doesn't matter. What is this making a decision to turn my will and my life over? He said, you turn your thoughts and your actions over. And in your case, why don't you just make a decision to continue the steps? And by making that decision to continue the steps, what I came to realize is that I was willing. In early recovery, man, if this building was open and I had the opportunity, I was here. If there was something that was recovery related, big book studies, we had meetings where we would listen to tapes. Because I wanted a new way of life. The only life I knew prior to coming in here was an alcoholic life, full of fear, and it was a lot of work to stay as messed up as I wanted to stay. And it was a job on top of job on top of job on top of job. So what I found is this is the softer, easier way. And it gets better. Get to this inventory deal. And, having had that spiritual experience with my first, fourth, and fifth step, I was willing to do it again. And because I'm a feel-good kind of guy, I was seeking that spiritual experience again. And I never got it again. What I found was a lot of truth about myself. I found out that I am selfish. I'm dishonest. I am very afraid. So by going through this process, I do this fifth step, and I've done multiple fourth steps and multiple fifth steps with multiple people. Because the fear of, I know today that fear will only keep me sober for so long before I've got to find some ease and comfort and do something else. Get to 6 and 7, the forgotten steps. There's only a couple paragraphs. And for me, it was about the willingness. Okay, God, here I am. I'm willing to do something different. I can acknowledge these things because that's me and I've done them. My sponsor used to say, we don't use alcohol as an excuse for our behavior. We have to own that stuff. So I'm looking at that, and then we go to the 7th step, and it's about, God asks that you have all of me, both good and bad, because there's some good in me. I had to find that. I had to do an inventory of assets because I'm so hard on myself. My self-worth, it has to start somewhere. I know today that this program helps build character. It helps me do the things that I don't want to do. Do I want to go and apologize for lying to this person? No. Do I do it because my life depends on it? Yes. That's what this program's given me. It's given me an alternative. Do I want to go back to the way that I was living? Or do I want to continue the way that I'm living today? Steps 8 and 9, I didn't know it, but I'd burned those first couple 4 steps I'd done. Get to 8 and 9, guess what? I needed that list. Because that's where the names come from. I get to this thing, and as I'm going through it, I've cleaned up most of the wreckage of the past. My sponsor used to always ask me, Richard, how free do you want to be? How free do you want to be? And I can use that in every aspect of my life, at any phase of my recovery. How free do you want to be, Richard? How long do you want to try to hold on to some of that power you think you got? Or how long do you want to hold on to that defect of character that's making your life absolutely miserable? And everybody around you. So 8 and 9, funny story, financial amends. I'd borrowed some money from my brother. Some of y'all know him. And it was about $300 or $400. I go to him and I said, look, man, I can't pay you all at one time, but I can make you payments. And he said, okay. And I said, is there, what can I do to make it right? He said, I want it in quarters. So I had to go to the bank on payday and get $100 worth of quarters to give to him, because that's the way he wanted it. And I asked him, I said, why did you do that? He said, because if it's in change, I ain't going to spend it. So he'd take it, put it in his piggy bank. But anyway, it's those little things that taking action. I'm responsible for my own recovery. Nobody can get me sober, and nobody can keep me sober. It's about my relationship with this God of my understanding that I found by taking those steps. And, step 10, I remember doing inventory at stoplights when I first got sober on a piece of napkin. I'm resentful. Okay, son of a, And because I would write it out. My first resentment was towards my sponsor. He stood me up on my birthday. Crushed me. I went home and curled up. I couldn't even work. So I said, I'm an emotional creature. Ain't much changed, except it's not as high and it's not as low. Early recovery, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but I had to experience it. And you do too. The reality of it is that the highs and the lows get to a place where they're not as high and they're not as low. I came in here on a pink cloud, and if you are, stay there. You don't ever have to come off that thing. 11, my relationship with my higher power is the biggest thing in my life today. The open-mindedness of this program has allowed me to, explore who this higher power is. To go to the mountaintop with the mystics, to sweat with the Indians, to, mess with my chakras, whatever. But it's allowed me the open-mindedness to do and to seek this higher power. And our book talks about, God doesn't make too hard of terms with those who seek Him. So whatever way that I have to seek Him, and that's the beauty of this program, is it works. And it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you practice, as long as you do these things. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I told you I had that spiritual experience laying in the jail cell, where this wave and this sense of ease and comfort, this peace that I'd never been able to experience before in my life up to that point. I can honestly say that by working these steps, coming back in, picking up that white chip, working these steps, I've had that spiritual awakening to where that same peace, that same serenity has washed over me as a result of these steps. Now, God had to smack me sober the first time so that I could experience that. But the second time, I had to actually take some action. I know today that first time around, when the process stops, the process stops. I got out of that treatment center, worked the first 5 steps, and I was good. I'd gotten this relief. But the process stopped. I know today that when the process stops, the process stops. So I have to keep doing these things on a daily basis. It's been an honor and privilege to work with other alcoholics. A book talks about, it used to make me nervous, and I'm fixing to close up. It used to make me nervous when someone would ask me to talk or to speak, especially in early recovery, because it had always coincided with some kind of emotional upheaval going on in my life. Either it was a relationship thing, or it was a job thing, or I was just crazy. And what I've come to realize is that, today those same things are going on, but I'm not so emotionally charged about them. They say don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff in the big scheme of things. I'm grateful I didn't have to take a drink today. I'm grateful you didn't either. And if you did, I hope this is a message of hope for you, that there is a way out. There is a solution. There is a better way of life. And, it's, with that, I've got to experience a lot of things in recovery. A lot of firsts. I got to fish on those piers that I got kicked off of. I got married in recovery. I became a father in recovery. I got divorced in recovery. And I didn't find it necessary to take a drink. But for the grace of God, this fellowship, these steps, it's a wonderful way to live. And if you ain't, I just ask that you try it. If you don't like what we got, your misery will be cheerfully refunded. And if nobody's told you they love you today, I do. Thank you for being here.